After my sister made false abuse claims and my family disowned me, they've now returned years later wanting to rebuild our relationship. Back in 2002, when I was 18, I had just graduated high school and was gearing up to start my journey at a prestigious engineering college. My name's Eric, by the way. At the time, I was genuinely excited to dive into this new chapter of my life. Growing up, my home life wasn't bad, but it wasn't exactly warm and fuzzy either. My parents weren't neglectful, but I always seemed to take a backseat to my younger sister, Madison, the golden child of the family. From a young age, it was obvious I had a knack for academics. But instead of getting praise for my efforts, all it ever earned me were higher expectations. For me, messing up wasn't an option, and when I did, the consequences were no joke. I'll never forget the time I forgot to lock the front door when I was 16. My punishment? They took away my car for an entire month. Achievements, on the other hand, were treated like they were no big deal. Sure, my parents would occasionally say they were proud, but my accomplishments never got any real recognition or celebration. Now, Madison was a whole different story. At 14, she was treated like royalty. She could practically do no wrong in their eyes. If she messed up, there was always an excuse lined up to explain her behavior, and her punishments were little more than a slap on the wrist or a mild scolding. Academically, she was average, not stupid, just nothing remarkable, but physically, she was a standout. By middle school, she was already competing as a level 8 gymnast. While she wasn't headed for the Olympics, she was definitely talented. I still remember how even my birthdays would get hijacked to show off her gymnastics skills. She'd get extra gifts, and she'd even have a say in where we went to eat. When she finally quit gymnastics in 7th grade, I felt this huge wave of relief, partly because I was sick of hearing about it, but also because I no longer had to sit through her endless competitions. Fast forward to the summer after my freshman year of college. I had just finished an amazing year. I'd made the dean's list both semesters, joined the school's shooting club, turns out, I was a natural, found a solid group of friends, and even started dating a girl named Lauren. We'd been together for about 8 months by then. Memorial Day weekend rolled around, and we had our usual big family barbecue, extended family, family friends, even some of Dad's co-workers. It was a big deal. I was riding high, proud of everything I'd accomplished that year. But if my parents noticed, they sure didn't show it. The spotlight that day was all on Madison. She'd made All-State in the pole vault as a freshman in high school, and that was all anyone could talk about. Out of the entire crowd, only 2 people even bothered to ask me how college was going. Honestly, though, I wasn't surprised. Why would my ability to rebuild an engine from scratch compete with Madison's talent for vaulting over a bar with a stick? It was frustrating, but I'd learned to shrug it off by then. Things took a turn a few months later, during Thanksgiving. By then, I'd added another big accomplishment to my list. I'd been selected for an international internship in the UK for the upcoming summer. Most of the expenses were covered by a scholarship, but there was a small chunk I'd have to pay out of pocket. To my shock, my dad not only congratulated me but even offered to cover the rest of the costs. I was floored and genuinely grateful. Around the same time, Madison had finally done something that even my parents couldn't excuse. She got caught doing something highly inappropriate with a classmate in the school parking lot during lunch. To make matters worse, a search of her backpack revealed she had pot on her. She was suspended from school for 10 days, and my parents grounded her by taking away her car for a month. I couldn't help but notice the irony. Forgetting to lock a door at 16 got me the same punishment as Madison's public indecency and drug possession. But I kept my thoughts to myself. I was just relieved to finally be the golden child for once, even if it was temporary. Thanksgiving dinner that year was surreal. For the first time, I was the talk of the family. My grandparents and aunts couldn't stop praising me for my accomplishments, while Madison sat there quietly, clearly embarrassed by her recent screw-up. It was a moment I'd dreamed of for years. But that feeling of triumph didn't last long. I returned to school on Sunday night, feeling on top of the world, and went straight to Lauren's apartment. That night, everything still felt normal. Little did I know, it would be the last night of normalcy in my life for a very long time. The next day, I got back from class and found an email from my dad sitting in my inbox. It read, "Eric, your sister has informed us of your heinous acts against her. I don't know where your mother and I went wrong, or how you could do something so despicable to your own sister. While this does explain her recent troubles, it doesn't lessen the heartbreak of knowing you are the cause. You've destroyed this family. I've already informed our relatives. Do not reach out to them. The only reason we aren't pursuing legal action is to spare Madison the trauma of facing you. From this moment forward, you are no longer my son. I will be legally disowning you. Do not attempt to contact us again." I froze. My mind was racing. What heinous acts? What on earth was he talking about? Panicked, I started calling home, then my dad's cell. No one answered. I tried calling other relatives, but it was the same, no answer. Desperate, I dialed Madison's number. To my shock, someone picked up. It was my dad, and I could hear Madison sobbing in the background. I begged him to tell me what was going on, but he cut me off, accusing me of playing dumb. The only reason he'd answered, he said, was because he couldn't believe I'd stoop so low as to call Madison directly. He called me a monster and demanded to know how I could have done such horrible things to her. I pleaded with him, swore I had no idea what he was talking about, but he refused to listen. He ended the call with a threat: if I ever tried to contact them again, he'd make sure I ended up on the sex offender registry. That was my last chance to leave them alone. I was shattered. In a matter of hours, my entire life had fallen apart. I went to Lauren for support, pouring out everything that had happened. She tried to comfort me, but I could tell something was off. She asked me to go back to my dorm for the night, and I reluctantly agreed. When I got to my dorm, my roommate, Jake, was there. He'd been my best friend since freshman year, but when I told him what happened, I saw his demeanor change too. He tried to be supportive, but there was a distance in his voice I couldn't ignore. Over the next week, everything unraveled. Lauren broke up with me in a crowded cafe, with her brother and cousin nearby like bodyguards. At least she didn't ghost me, I guess. Jake requested an emergency transfer to another dorm. Both of them assumed my guilt. They figured my family wouldn't cut me off unless I'd done something truly awful. In just 1 week, I lost everyone who mattered to me. At 20 years old, I was completely alone, with no idea how to pick up the pieces. For the past decade, I've done my best to move forward, but the pain of being cast out by everyone I loved never truly faded. It changed me in ways I can't even explain. Then, just a day ago, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from my parents. The letter was an apology. Madison had finally confessed, after 10 years, that she'd made it all up. I spent years praying for this moment, but now that it's here, I don't know what to do. Can you ever really reconcile after that kind of betrayal? Or is it better to leave the past where it belongs and keep moving forward? I don't know. As I mentioned in my last post, I got a letter from my parents. It said my sister had confessed that the abuse allegations were false. They were seeking forgiveness and reconciliation, even leaving their phone number and email so I could reach out. I sat on that letter for a few days, trying to figure out how to feel about it. Then another letter arrived, this one from my sister. Inside the envelope were 2 separate letters. One talked about her life since I'd been cast out, the other was her confession. The confession, turns out, it wasn't even her idea to come clean. Her husband convinced her, guess she couldn't muster the guts to do it herself. She wrote that she regretted everything and admitted that things spiraled way out of control. Apparently, she'd been upset about the judgment and scorn she'd been getting from the family. She needed an excuse, something big enough to explain her behavior. She remembered hearing that promiscuity and drug use were common among abuse victims. So, she concocted this story that I'd assaulted her over the summer, claiming that's why she was acting out. Of course, my parents, always eager to find a reason to absolve her of any wrongdoing, bought it without question. Hook, line, and sinker. The truth? She wasn't behaving any worse than a typical teenager. My parents just had her on such a high pedestal that they couldn't imagine her doing anything wrong without some earth-shattering explanation. She admitted she didn't expect my dad's reaction to be so extreme. She liked being the center of attention again, but she was too scared to come clean. The stakes got higher once my dad threw me out. She said she convinced my parents not to go to the authorities by begging them out of some self-serving fear not to make her face me in court. After I was gone and it became clear I wasn't coming back, she told herself she'd take the secret to her grave. Her guilt to bear, or so she thought. The mental gymnastics on this woman, I swear. She said she only started reconsidering 3 years ago, after she got married. Her husband had heard about the abuse from a relative, but when he tried to discuss it, she brushed it off. Over time, he got suspicious because she didn't show any signs typical of an assault survivor. He kept pressing, and eventually, she admitted it was a lie. He's been urging her to come clean ever since. Honestly, he seems way too good for my family. Now that she has a daughter, our parents' first grandchild, she feels like she'll never face the consequences I did. So, she decided it's finally time to unburden herself and seek forgiveness. Classic Alicia. It's still all about her. She ended her confession by asking me not to share the full truth with our parents. Apparently, she only gave them the naive girl too scared to fix her mistakes version. She also mentioned that she's been pushing for me to be invited to Christmas in a few weeks. Her exact words? So we can all start being a family again. Yeah, sure. As painful as that confession was to read, the life update she included was somehow worse. She talked about how amazing her high school years were, how she got a track scholarship to the University of Iowa, how she met her husband, and how they now have a big house and a newborn daughter. She's been living the dream for the past decade. Meanwhile, my life fell apart. I lost my family, my girlfriend, and my best friend. My grades tanked because I spent that first semester drowning my sorrows in alcohol. The internship I had lined up? Gone. The study abroad opportunity in the UK? They gave my spot to someone else. I hit rock bottom. One night, I spent 4 hours sitting on the edge of a bridge, trying to find the courage to take that final step. When I couldn't go through with it, I decided that if I couldn't end my life, I'd find a way to get myself killed. I dropped out of school a few weeks later and enlisted in the Marine Corps. This was during the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. I excelled in training and got the assignment I wanted, EOD. Explosive Ordnance Disposal. I figured handling IEDs would be the quickest way to meet my end. But life had other plans. 8 years later, I was discharged, still in one piece. During those years, I didn't form many relationships. When you've been abandoned by everyone, you learn to keep people at arm's length. I'd go on dates 2, 3, 4, and then, if a woman didn't respond to a text right away, I'd panic and end things before she could leave me. Friends? Non-existent. I trusted my fellow Marines with my life but not with my soul. Except for one guy, Val. Somehow, he broke through. He's the only friend I have to this day. After we both got out, I moved to West Virginia to be closer to him and his wife. They just had a baby 7 months ago, and now I'm officially Uncle Chris. But my life? It's nowhere near what I imagined when I graduated high school. I still haven't finished college. I work at a small factory. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment and drive a car with 300,000 miles on it. I have a small fortune saved from my years in the service, but I don't do anything with it. My life is bare bones, by choice. And now, my sister's living it up while I'm stuck here trying to piece my life back together. It's infuriating that they think they can just invite me to Iowa for Christmas and call it even. The same Christmas I've been excluded from for 10 years. I keep going back and forth. Do I go and finally get the closure I've been dreaming of? Or do I ignore them and focus on rebuilding the broken life I've got? 17 days until Christmas Eve. That's how long I've got before I'm set to meet with my family for the first time in over a decade. But before I can even process that, tragedy has struck, a blow so devastating it's hard to find the words. 2 nights ago, my closest brother in life, Val, suffered an unimaginable loss. His baby girl, my honorary niece, Michelle, passed away from SIDS. This pain is sharper, deeper than anything I've endured in the last 10 years. It's an ache that seems to reach into my very bones, leaving me raw and hollow. Let me tell you about Val and his wife, Kim. They're not what most people would consider conventional. They've chosen to live off the grid in a way that might raise eyebrows, but it works for them. Their home runs on solar power and propane. They pull their water from their own well. They've designed their lives to be self-sufficient, unbound by the tethers of modern conveniences. Yet for all their independence, they were meticulous and thoughtful when it came to their daughter. Michelle was born at home, but she was seen by doctors, vaccinated, and cared for in every way imaginable. They might live differently, but they never took chances with their little girl's well-being. I'm sharing this to help you understand what today looked like for us. Early this morning, I met Val, and together, we built the tiny casket where Michelle will rest. Our hands worked in silence, shaping the wood through the weight of our shared grief. Later, we dug her grave on Val's family's land. Tomorrow, we'll gather with his father for a quiet funeral, just the four of us. It's not legal, I know that, but it's what Val and Kim want for their daughter, and I'll honor that. Update: the funeral is over. It was as somber and heartbreaking as you'd expect, but in the midst of that sorrow, something clicked for me. A moment of clarity. I decided I need to go through with this meeting with my family. Not just for me, but for Val and Kim too. Their strength, their resilience, it's inspired me. If they can endure this, I can face my own storm. So, I've decided, I'll accept my family's invitation. Update 2 days until I leave for Iowa. Plans are in place. I've booked myself a decent hotel, decided against cutting corners on this one, and rented a reliable car. There's no way my old beater could handle a trip like this. I'll get there on December 23rd, settle in, and then meet my family at their home on Christmas Eve. Apparently, they moved from Illinois years ago, right around the time Alicia started her sophomore year of college. Makes me wonder if they were trying to make it harder for me to find them. In preparation, I asked to follow them on social media. They agreed, and now I've been sifting through a decade of posts, pictures, and memories I wasn't part of. It's surreal, seeing how they've aged, how they've lived their lives without me. I've been studying every detail, the house I'll be walking into, the events I missed, the faces that used to mean the world to me. Every day since Michelle's passing, I've spent time with Val and Kim. Their pain is immense, yet they've been doing everything they can to help me prepare for this trip. That's what real family does, isn't it? They're there for you, even when they're drowning in their own grief. They sacrifice for you, lift you up when you can't stand on your own. Without them, I don't think I'd have the courage to face what's ahead. I know this road is going to be tough. It'll be emotional, messy, and probably painful. But I'm ready to take the first step. As soon as I can, I'll share how it goes. For now, I'll keep moving forward, carrying the love and support of the only real family I've ever known, Val and Kim, as I walk into the unknown. It's been a long time coming, but for those of you who've been waiting patiently, here's my final update. I know some of you might already know parts of this story, but as I've always said, if you want the full truth, you'll have to read it here like everyone else. I arrived at my parents' house 30 minutes later than the time they had given me. It was intentional. I wanted to be the last one there so I could get all the awkward greetings and hugs over with in one go. Christmas Eve wasn't a huge gathering, just my two grandmothers, one grandfather, an aunt and uncle, their son and his wife, my parents, my sister Alicia, her husband Billy, poor guy, and their daughter Ivy. Ironically, Ivy and Billy were the only ones who hadn't cut me off over the years. Everyone insisted on hugging me, and though I allowed it, it wasn't because I wanted to. I just didn't want to make things even more uncomfortable. I carried in a few presents, just enough to look thoughtful even though they were heavier than I let on. Predictably, everyone said I didn't need to bring anything, but it was all part of the plan. If I was going to do this, I had to do it right. I placed the two largest gifts front and center under the tree where they couldn't be missed. I also had a couple of smaller packages that I discreetly left in different rooms during the house tour. For the next 45 minutes, I endured small talk and smiled through gritted teeth. Then came the announcement that it was time for presents. That was my cue. I turned to Alicia and asked if we could talk privately for a few moments. She hesitated but eventually agreed, cradling Ivy in her arms. "Is it okay if I bring the baby?" she asked, trying to keep the moment light. Of course, I said, my voice calm and even. We stepped outside into the cold night air, the chill biting but strangely invigorating. She didn't waste a second before launching into an apology, a flood of words thanking me for not revealing the real truth to our parents. I stopped her mid-sentence, raising a hand to silence her. Hold that thought, I said, forcing a smile. I have something for you in my car. She smiled, probably thinking it was some sort of peace offering. Okay, she said softly. I walked to my car and returned with a small remote in my hand. I placed it gently in hers. She looked at me, puzzled, but there was still a hint of that familiar smugness in her expression. What's this? She asked with a laugh. Push it, I said simply. You'll see. The system I had built was a testament to my engineering skills that had never really been given the chance to shine. The remote activated the first phase, the deployment system. The two large gifts under the tree burst open, releasing sprayers attached to rotating cylinders. Accelerants sprayed across the living room, coating every surface with precision. The second phase launched flares, igniting the accelerants. It was beautifully timed. Everyone had gathered in the living room, directly in front of the tree. The flames erupted instantly, engulfing the space in a blinding flash of light and heat. Alicia's face twisted in terror as she realized what was happening. But before she could scream, I pulled out the 9mm tucked under my jacket and fired a single shot into her left knee. She crumpled to the ground, clutching Ivy tightly. I fired a few more rounds through the window to ensure the flames would spread quickly, feeding on the fresh oxygen. The house became an inferno in seconds. I looked down at Alicia as she writhed in pain, her grip on Ivy faltering. Tears streamed down her face as she begged me to stop. I crouched down, prying the baby gently from her arms. Take a good look, I said, holding Ivy out so Alicia could see her. This is all because of you. If you hadn't lied, none of this would have happened. If you hadn't confessed, none of this would have happened. If you hadn't insisted I come here tonight, this would never have happened. Take a good look at Ivy, because this is the last time you'll ever see her. You will never find her. The sirens were getting closer now. Time was running out. I carried Ivy to my car, where a small, padded box waited in the front seat. It wasn't ideal, but it would do for the short drive. I drove calmly to the meeting point, an abandoned lot behind an old warehouse just 6 minutes away. Val and Kim were already there, waiting with the engine running. I handed Ivy to Kim, who kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thank you." Val embraced me tightly, calling me brother one last time. All is well, he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. I watched them drive away, their taillights disappearing into the night. Then, I returned to the scene. Parking 2 blocks away, I stripped down to my compression shorts and walked toward the house with my hands raised above my head. The paramedics were tending to Alicia, who was hysterical, screaming incoherently about Ivy. She didn't even notice me as I surrendered to the police. The rest, as they say, is history. I'm serving life without parole, and I'm okay with that. The only part one regret is Billy. He was a decent guy, just married to the wrong person. 10 years later, after the agreed-upon decade of no contact, I received a letter from Val. It came through a series of intermediaries to ensure it couldn't be traced. In his handwriting, it simply said, "All is well." They never found Ivy. They never found Val and Kim. They got to be the family I had always dreamed of having. Knowing that makes everything I've endured worth it. Now, as I write this, I'm reflecting on the strange turn my life has taken. When Netflix approached me with the idea of making a documentary, I agreed, not for the money, but for the chance to finally tell my story.